Welcome to J Lowe Artist. Thanks for being here. I appreciate your support and all those who have come out and commented, those of you who are drawing with me. Art makes life better. Let's make your life better. Thanks for being here today, by the way. It's always a joy for me to paint along with you. Today we're going to be doing water paints, and your water is going to stay like this. It's going to stay as clean as you can. So many times people will start painting and they clean their brush in the water, and that water gets muddy, and then they'll take that muddy water and put it in their colors and think, why are my colors not bright and vibrant? Well, if you take mud to anything, it's going to end up being mud. So this water stays clean. Do not clean your brush in your water. You're going to clean your brush on your paper towel. So take one paper towel and put it in your offhand, and that's where you're going to clean things. Plus, if anything gets too drippy and you think, oh, I got to clean that really fast, you got your paper towel and you can grab it before it gets too far. Okay, so you're always having a dry paper towel in this hand. And always have another paper towel close by that in case you need it, it's going to be there. We're going to be mixing. If we mix anything, it's going to be in our palette. But for this purpose, I'm going to just show you some different techniques. We're going to start out with what we call wet on wet. We're going to get the entire surface wet, and then we're going to dabble in our pigments. And then after we get that done, we'll let it dry a little bit, and we'll take wet on dry. And then we have a little bit of a dry brush. Dry brush is going to have sharper edges, so that kind of makes your object look like it comes forward. So like the rock needs some sharper edges. There isn't anything really that needs a lot of sharp edges in here. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and draw out what it is you need. Now, there is a tangent here that is not very pleasing. And that tangent is where the horizon and the rock are. They're kind of the same level. And that's not very pleasing. You either make the rock smaller or the rock larger to give that horizon, that tangent where the horizon and the rock meet, a little different edge. So, for example, for me, if my horizon line is about a third of the way up, so if I look at my composition, I go down about a third of it and say, well, that's where my horizon line is. That's where my sea level and everything is going to be. You also have a wave that's kind of coming up on the one side, and those two, they kind of play against each other. So compositionally, it's not a great composition. So we're gonna change our composition just a little bit. I'm gonna have that wave kind of come over more towards the middle and kind of come down, and then that rock is going to come up over my horizon line, break it a little bit more. So it's going to be a little bit bigger rock. Have that wave kind of maybe come over, maybe some of this spray kind of splashing into the rock there. Which means I have to improvise a little bit more on the left side. But that's a better composition. You see how my rock breaks the edge here? I don't like to draw very heavily when I'm water painting, because your water paint is a natural fixative. But just for you guys, I'm going to draw heavy. Just because I love you and want you to be able to see what I'm doing. You may even want to use a ruler on your horizon line, because it should be fairly flat. Somewhere, in fact, so where this wave is and where the sun is just set, you can see where that bright spot is. I'm going to put those kind of together right there, almost. So the top of that wave and that sunlight there are going to be kind of together. It's going to create a little bit more unity. Anytime you want things to look like they go together, you combine them a little bit. You might even have them touching a little bit. You could, if you wanted to, draw in some of those clouds and things, but I think spontaneously we're going to allow those clouds to just kind of happen. If we don't get a cloud in the right place, in other words, it doesn't look like our reference, that's not going to matter. Because as soon as this picture was taken, the waves changed, the clouds changed, Now, the only thing that didn't change much is that rock. And so if it's slightly off, it's not a big difference. We're just using the picture as a reference, as a color reference, and as a composition reference. So the first thing you want to do is put about 2 or 3 drops of water in each of your cakes of paint. These are just those very inexpensive Crayola water paints. You don't have to do black because there's nothing on here that is black. There are some dark things, but you can get dark with purple. And if you need black, you could put like 1 drop in black. If you need it, there's probably a little bit, but for the most part, you can just leave out black. So for the next 3 minutes, that water, capillary action is going to pull that water down into it. While this paint is mixing, let me just give you a little bit of background. When you paint with your paintbrush, you're going to just barely touch that. You don't want to immerse your brush in your paint because you only need like 1/4 of an inch, just a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of paint there. This whole paint thing should last you for years and years because you don't use very much paint when you're water painting. So right now, we're going to do the sky. We're going to do the whole sky. So you take your water brush and you just go ahead and put water on your whole surface, all through there. And hopefully your water brush is clean. If it isn't, either clean it out or get a different brush. It's got to be nice and clean. And you want to put nice drippy water all over that. It should be shiny with your water. Avoid your rock. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the water all the way to the edge of the rock and all the way to the edge of my horizon. And even my wave, I'm going to kind of avoid that wave a little bit. Just get it nice and wet. Just nice and wet. And just keep putting water into it. It doesn't want to run. You don't want to put so much water in it that it runs. But you do want enough water that it's going to be nice and shiny, wet. And now you can start dabbling in your color. So I'm going to start with purple, and then I'm going to move into my blues. So I'm just going to touch the purple. There's just a tiny, tiny bit of purple in there. Now I'm just going to touch it in there and just drabble it down in there. Here's my purple. And go ahead and leave out little areas where your clouds are. And it should fuzz out. Remember, with water paint, a lot of the paint happens after you put it on the surface. It just kind of does its thing. It fuzzes out. You want those soft, fuzzy edges. Anything in the background needs to be soft and fuzzy. And you can just touch some of these areas and just watch what happens. It just fuzzes out. And those are your clouds. Don't do too much. Just let it fuzz, let it do its thing. And they will do that long after you've touched it. Sometimes you have to tip it because your water's like coagulating at one place. Is that the word, coagulating? And then try some blue. Just dab that blue in there. Let it do its thing. If you need water, just go ahead and put your brush in the water once. Don't mix it around. Your brush is like a sponge. It'll sponge it up. And then just kind of dabble it in. Try to do it as quick as you can. so that that water doesn't dry up too much. And then just keep moving it until the pigment is gone out of your brush. You'll see it get lighter and lighter, and so as it gets lighter and lighter, you just move it down, because your horizon line is going to be nice and light. I'm just dabbling it. I'm like kind of almost like dots. But if you want to, you can go back and forth a little bit here too. Lots of water. Just let it bleed out and do its thing. Now the rest of this I'm going to paint just with water. So I've got water in my brush, and I'm just going to touch it. Dabble it over. It picks up some of the paint that's around it. I can always come back into it with more too. Now, while this is still wet, right, especially by the horizon, I'm going to take a little yellow, maybe a little orange, maybe a little red, come back up to it. Right along my horizon. Bring that up. You can even, if you want to tilt your paper, your board, and let it run up there. You see it running there? Maybe I want a little orange in there. That one spot that's very, very, very light in there. Just took my finger and kind of pushed off that color so it was very light in there. I'm just going to dabble in a little bit of orange along the horizon there. And it should just run right up with all the rest of it. Maybe a little bit of red here and there, if you want it. It's up to you. There's a happy little cloud that's kind of red right there. I'm not trying to follow those clouds exactly. Like I say, that configuration of clouds does not exist anymore. Just keep it nice and wet. Have it just kind of move along, do its thing. Now, some of those white areas, you think, well, those are just too stark white. It's light blue. So you just take water, and you've got a little bit of something on your brush. I'm not really sure what's in the tip of my brush. I'm just going to take water, and I'm going to dabble it in there, and it's going to pick up some of that light blue, or that blue that's around it, maybe even some of that peachy orange. Nothing wrong with that. And I'm just going to use the paint that's already there, paint in the light areas and get a tint. So this is just water in my brush. Just manipulating some of that around. because there's nothing really white in the sky. It's just water. And if it's wet already, then the paint will be picked up and it'll move into those areas. But you want to keep that variant of light and dark. And if your sky is too light, you can always add a little bit more color to it and dabble in some more color. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, I some of this up here, I want it a little bit more purple. Maybe I'm just going to take a little purple in there and just go over the whole thing. But I don't want to go over it too much. I'm just going to drop in this purple and allow some of those colors that are underneath to kind of come through. If I go over it too much, then I lose my texture that I've already got. So you just one or two little wipes and you've got it. Don't go over it too much. You want that nice light. And then you pick and choose. How much of that do you want to bring down? Barely touch your paint. You just need a tiny bit on your brush. Go back over some of those areas. Whatever you think you need. And really, you got to kind of almost trust that it's going to change a little bit. It's all about water management. If you need more water, you can take your water brush and you can just go over the whole surface. Let it bleed, let it do its thing. Lots of really soft textures here. But don't rub too much. So you can put color in, you can dab some water into it, let it bleed. Whatever you think you need. If you're getting some muddy color out of your brush because you've got too much in there, clean it off by dipping it once in the water. Let it sit in your brush and then dab out the pigment on your paper towel. This paper towel I used last period as well. And so you really don't, there's just not a lot of paint that you use. You know, keep it fairly small. Just barely touch your brush to your paint. You just don't need much. I'm pretty spontaneous with this. It's like, once I got the texture down, you just kind of do what you want to. And it will, you know, even after you've painted it, minutes after you've painted it, it'll do other things because it's bleeding and doing its thing. You want to soften your edges. Just use a little water. Just touch it. Needed that a little pinker, so I just put just a tiny bit of pink on my brush and off it goes. Now we can come back into the sky even later on if we feel like we need more there. Some of these edges are a little hard, so I'm just going to go into it with some water and soften them up a little bit. But again, don't rub too much. The more you rub, the muddier it gets. You just dab it in and just let it run and do its thing. So we're going to do kind of the same thing that we did with the sky with the water, but the water has some more distinct kinds of things, and they're a little harder edged. And so we may not get it as wet as we did before. In fact, some of those waves are pretty dark and pretty hard edged. Not real hard edged, but kind of. And so I'm going to just start with a wet on dry technique where I put a little bit of water on my brush, just a little bit. Then I'm going to put a little bit of pigment on my brush. I'm going to use purple. I just want a little bit of water and a little bit of pigment on there. I'm just going to come in and do my horizon line. Nice and if your water and stuff starts to separate a little bit, that's okay, because there's different little areas of your horizon. Just every now and then pull out some, and I'm just going to go back and forth and let my pen kind of, or my brush, like a pen, kind of skip across the surface. And there's my darker waves. There's some of that wave that's breaking. Just a little bit here and there. Now that's kind of my basics. Now I'm going to go back into it with other colors and kind of dabble it in. Hopefully that purple is just going to stay there and remind me where those waves are. Got to go back into it and do some darker areas as well. Maybe while I'm at it, maybe I'm going to do some of this. Just very lightly, just to kind of, it's almost like sketching. And you just kind of, very lightly, whatever pigment is left in my brush. There's some darker areas in there. Just kind of help me to see where things are, where I need to go with it. And maybe while that's still wet, I can go into it with some different colors. I'm going to try some green. Let that fuzz out a little bit. I don't have to go everywhere, just here and there. I might even want some of that in the background. Just a little bit. Most of that pigment now is coming out of my brush. I want to get rid of as much of it as I can. And if there's still pigment left in there, I might go into the rock and just go, well, that rock is brown. There's lots of colors in that rock. There's a lot of black, so it's not going to hurt for me to go in with some color and just try to get rid of all that color that's in that brush. And now most of that pigment is gone out of my brush. We put a little bit of, what color do we need in there? A little rosy orange maybe? Let's see, orange and blue are complementary colors, and yellow and purple are complementary colors. So if I want them to tone each other down a little bit, I might want to put some of that in there. A little yellow. That was probably too much. That's okay. So I'm just going to dabble in some here and there. I'm still leaving some areas open. There's some yellow back in there. Might want to do a little bit of orange back in there, just a little bit. Water always reflects the sky. So whatever color your water is, that should be your sky as well. So I had a little bit of orange on my brush. I'm just going to go back into that, just barely put some in there. You can even put that over in your rock if you wanted to. I've just got water in my brush now. I'm going to go into it and just go over some of those colors, let them kind of bleed together. Don't want to run too much. It's going to do it by itself. Don't force it, because if you do, it gets muddy. One stroke with water and it'll do its thing. Give it some time. So maybe while we let that dry a little bit, I'm going to go back into my rock here, and I want some dabby color in there. So I'm going to take my wet part of the brush and just go over the whole rock. If it bleeds a little bit, that's okay. What would you use? A little brown maybe? Just here and there? Just dabble some brown in there. Just a tiny, tiny bit. And again, don't be afraid to leave it and let it just kind of run and do its thing. Don't force it. So there's some basics of your rock. You can add other colors to that if you want to. Might add a little bit of purple into that. Just a tiny bit. Here and there, and I'm just going to let it dabble and run. I'm not wiping it. I'm just dabbling it. And it's going to run and do its thing. So because there's a little bit of yellow in that brown, it's going to take your purple and it's going to make it look gray. If you tried to do it with black, it'll look poopy. But you do it with purple and it's still purple, but it kind of has a gray tone because the yellow cancels out the purple. Might want to add a little bit of orange to that too, just to warm it up a little bit. And just dabble it in. Don't force it. Never force anything. A little bit of that orange is kind of nice. While we've been doing that rock, this has been drying. So hopefully we can come back into it. And I'm just going to take I want some of that watery spray to kind of come around. So I'm going to take my water and go back over that, over the whole surface, and don't wipe it too much. You don't want to get rid of that stuff we've already done in there. Just let it go with the water. Now I'm going to come back into it with a little bit of blue and just kind of dabble it, and look how it runs. That was like 3 little dabbles. Let it do that. Don't try to push it. Just dabble it. And it'll paint by itself almost. It's a really kind of a strange. If it gets too dry, add a little more water. Take that other brush, just add some water to it. You can always go darker. So I'm doing the negative spaces, these darker areas in between. Just barely touch it with the tip of your brush. This is why you want a nice sharp brush. Like I say, you got to work kind of quick. Otherwise, you have to add a little bit of water to it. And use my brush, add a little bit of back over some of those waves. And if it's still wet and it just kind of fuzzes out, that's okay. Because you've got layers of color. Now what, a little bit of purple maybe? Some of that's gotten too dry, so I've got to go back over it with some water here. Got it nice and wet. Dab a little bit of purple into that, just a tiny bit. Just let it do its thing. Almost called it happy accident. One thing I like about oil paint is it's very controllable, which is one thing I like about water paint is it's not. And you just kind of let it do its thing, and it will. So once you get kind of what you want, you think, oh, I need it a little bit lighter, and get it wet, dry your brush off, and then go back in and touch it, and it'll suck up a lot of that pigment. And then you can take that pigment and put it somewhere else. This is just my dry brush. I'm just going through and just picking up some of that pigment, putting it somewhere else. I feel like I need a little bit more orange or peachy, kind of pinky peachy up in here. I'll get some of that area wet. I'm just going to barely touch that red. Might be too much. Okay, I'm going to let that dry a little bit and go back to my rock. The rock just needs some purple. And this is where we're going to take a brush that's fairly dry, and you're going to get some harder edges here. So you don't want much water on there at all. Stronger shadow. You can have shadows within shadows. Just go back over those. And I don't know if it really matters what color you go back over them with, just to darken them in. Green, brown. But you just dabble this in and you're going to have those sharp edges. So just the tip of your brush, whatever you feel like you need there. See how you're getting a stronger edge? I'm kind of doing the same thing, but because there isn't any paint there or any water there, it's not bleeding. If you want it to bleed, you got to let it get kind of wet. And that contrast, that dark and light, is going to make your object come forward. So that rock is going to look like it's closer to you than all the rest of it, which it is. I'm going back over some of this with just water. One stroke, let it bleed. Some of this got a little bit bleedy. That's okay. Last thing you do is just that dry brush over the top of it. Give yourself some of that stronger contrast. Remember, don't stroke it across there. Then you're just asking for mud. Just dabble it in. So we're just about done with this. Last thing you want to do is, of course, sign it. And thanks for being here today, coming along with me on this little journey. Because art makes life better. Hope y'all have a wonderful day.